Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the main area of weakness that Atletico targeted and exploited within Xabi Alonso's tactical setup and Real's 5-2 loss to their city rivals in the Madrid derby. But before we get into today's video, don't forget to check out the Real Madrid videos we've put out over the past week, where we focused on Mbappe's key role against Espanyol and how Alonso's tactics tore apart Levante in just over an hour. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have both sides in a 4-4-2. Although it did feel like Madrid would go with a 4-2-3-1 with Jude just in behind Mbappe and Vinny Jr. and Arda Guler out in the wider areas. But here is more of a narrow 4-4-2 with Arda Guler and Jude out in those narrow wide positions. And Vinny Jr. was hugging the touchline on the left-hand side, but he had the license to float and swap positions with Mbappe. Alonso went with Carvajal at right back and Carreras at left back. And what you ended up seeing was that we did see a shift in how both sides looked to approach the game out of possession in terms of their overall shape, as they weren't necessarily into banks of four throughout it, both with and without the ball. Madrid at times dropped off into a 5-3-2 with Tchouaméni dropping in between the two center backs to ensure that Madrid were 3v2 against the two Atletico strikers, and that would leave Jude, Valverde, and Guler in that midfield zone with Mbappe and Vinny Jr. in advanced positions. Essentially, there were times where Jude could join Mbappe and lead the front press, with Vinny Jr. on the left-hand side looking to close down wide players. But the issue that Alonso's men had here was that their shape out of possession was disjointed, whether it was a 4-4-2 or more of a 5-3-2. And when you compare it to how Atletico approached the game, there just seemed to be a bit more discipline, cohesion, and compactness in that midfield zone. Similar to Real, they dropped off into a 5-3-2 out of possession, and they had Simeone move into a right wing back zone to drop deeper to ensure that Vinny Jr. wouldn't isolate Marcos Llorente in those positions. The same would apply for Mbappe drifting in towards those zones. So ultimately, they would have those two players and a spare center back being able to provide cover, along with a shuttler shifting out in towards those areas. And then when you focus on the top part of that 5-3-2, the front two would close down Tchouaméni and Valverde, and then they'd still have three central midfielders that could deal with Jude or Arda Guler shifting in towards those areas. And if the ball was pushed out in towards the wider areas, whether it be Carvajal, Carreras, or Militao getting the ball in those zones, then they could simply have the shuttler on that side shift across to close them down, whether it be Barrios or Nico Gonzalez. You see scenarios where the front two is blocking off the passing lanes in towards Tchouaméni and Valverde, and then they can look to close down two of the center backs and then have one of the shuttlers shift out towards the spare center back, because Madrid in their build-up were more of a 3-2-5 with Carreras operating as a left center back, and then you'd have Vinny Jr., Mbappe, Jude, Arda Guler, and Carvajal operating as the five attacking players. And in a lot of these scenarios, specifically down Real's left-hand side, they were able to cope with Mbappe and Vinny Jr. because they were able to have Marcos Llorente and a center back sitting on one of the attacking players, and then have a wing back and a shuttler shifting across for the other attacking Real player. Even with Carreras pushing forward into an underlapping position in the final third, Atleti were very compact and organized and often had four players shifting over and towards those zones. And when you compare it to Real, they were just simply much better organized, compact, and disciplined out of possession. And that's when you now have to focus on the issues that Real had out of possession. And it was simply down to just a lack of ball pressure when they had deeper midfielders dropping on towards the ball, and the positioning of the fullbacks, because Atleti were consistently looking to spam the poor positioning of Carreras and Carvajal when they got on the ball. Initially in the early stages down the right-hand side, the issue that Real were encountering was that Carvajal was being dragged out into wider areas higher up the pitch because Arda Guler was following Nico Gonzalez in central areas, and that created space for the free center backs. In the early stage, it was a long ball over the top with Mbappe closing late and Sorloth running off Militao, and from there the striker was able to get beyond the center back, breaking towards the Real penalty area with Courtois coming off his line, but Militao did a very good job of making a last-ditch recovery and breaking up that play. And then shortly after that, once again, you could see that Guler's in the central position with Nico Gonzalez. Carvajal's forced to step in towards the Atleti half, and from there, a long ball's played over the top, and this time it's Alvarez running off Militao, carrying the ball in towards the left channel and doing a very good job of retaining it. And that's where he picks out the late run from Barrios, breaking in towards the penalty area off Jude. But once again, Real get lucky as Jude does a very good job of recovering his positioning and making a last-ditch tackle to halt that attack. If we shift to the second half, we can identify a really bad Real breakdown where you could see Longley carrying the ball ahead of the 4-4-2 with Jude and Mbappe in the central areas, and he's allowed to carry the ball into the Real half. No one applies pressure, and that forces Valverde to now step forward to try and apply that pressure. But the problem that Real encounter here is that Nico Gonzalez runs off Valverde, and you could see neither Guler or Carvajal communicating to track that run. Longley pulls out Valverde and he ends up sliding the ball across him, and that's where Nico Gonzalez is able to break beyond Carvajal in towards the penalty area. But once again, Madrid do a very good job with a last-ditch recovery effort to ensure that he can't get a shot on goal. But what ended up happening in that second half was that Carvajal was now getting higher up the pitch along with Guler, and once Real lost possession, Atleti were able to break in beyond Guler and Carvajal, and that's where Alvarez was now able to carry the ball in towards the Real third, and from there he would drag out center backs and he forced Asensio into a booking. And then even with Arda Guler and Carvajal being replaced by Mastituono and Asensio shifting out towards that zone, you end up seeing that right side being bypassed, and it's Alvarez breaking in towards that zone to pull away Tchouaméni, who is now operating as a center back. Alvarez breaks down that left channel zone. He pulls away Tchouaméni, and that's where you end up seeing Nico Gonzalez making a simple run in between Asensio and Camavinga that's not tracked. He ends up bypassing Tchouaméni with a simple pass into left half space, and that creates an opportunity for Nico Gonzalez, but from a tight angle, Courtois denies him. Ultimately, it was just poor defending from Real as a whole, because in the build-up to Alvarez's free kick, you could see that Tchouaméni loses an aerial duel with Sorloth, but you have 4 Real players against 3 Atleti players. That ends up falling to Nico Gonzalez, who wins possession, and none of the center backs step forward. So now he's able to run at them. He breaks a challenge in between a center back and Camavinga, and is able to slide in the Atleti striker free in left half space. And from this position, he is denied by Courtois, but that ultimately results in Alvarez being fouled seconds later. So while you can say that on the right-hand side, Carvajal was being pulled out and that was a systemic issue that Atleti were exploiting on a consistent basis, over on the left-hand side for Real, Carreras' positioning off the ball was poor, and Atleti were consistently looking to play balls around him or over the top. In the early stages, Real's press was exploited, and you could see the center back playing the ball around Vinny Jr. for Marcos Llorente, and it pulls out Jude, and that's where you see Barrios making a run off Tchouaméni. The Atleti right back plays the ball easily around Jude, and you could see that Tchouaméni isn't tracking the movement of Barrios, and Barrios is able to get the ball around him, and then he pulls out the left back, and he's able to simply dribble around him down the right touchline, and from a deeper position, he picks out the run of Sorloth, breaking into free space in the penalty area. But unfortunately for Atleti, the cross is just a bit heavy, but Sorloth still does a very good job of getting contact with that delivery, and he forces Courtois to concede a corner. Ultimately, the build-up to Atleti's opening goal followed a similar theme, where there's no pressure on the ball from deep. You could see poor positioning from Carreras as he's unaware of Nico Gonzalez breaking beyond him, and from right half space, he's able to nod the ball over the left back towards the 6-yard area, and although Real do a very good job of clearing their lines, the ball falls to Simeone, who's free in the right channel, and that's where he ends up delivering a great cross in towards the 6-yard area where both Militao and Tchouaméni are beat. If you look to an example of Atleti's pressing higher up the pitch, you have the front two just in between Tchouaméni. You see Nico Gonzalez and Koke near Jude and Valverde, and that's where Barrios steps towards Carreras, and from there he's applying pressure, and he eventually forces the left back to concede possession higher up the pitch, and from there he wins the ball. He has Alvarez breaking towards the right channel, but again Sorloth is free near the penalty area, and he slides the ball across Tchouaméni for Sorloth, but he can only stretch out his legs to force Courtois into a save. But time and time again in that opening half, you end up seeing Atleti center backs or midfielders dropping off in deeper positions, no pressure applied, and long ball simply over the top of the left back who's poorly positioned, and it allows Atleti to get themselves into advanced areas in the final third. And in the build up to the second goal from a quick throw, it's Koke with time and space on the ball, and Arda Guler doesn't get tight towards him, and you see Sorloth making a run in between the center back and Carreras, and from here he's able to position himself goal side of the left back. And although the center back does a poor job of dealing with the delivery, the left back's positioning allows Sorloth to rise high and nod a powerful effort from the edge of the 6-yard area beyond Courtois. So where both the spatial and positional awareness of Carreras was exploited in that opening half, in the second half, prior to Atleti running away with the game, he was simply just being pulled out of position. And you can see the lack of good cover in these scenarios where you have Bellingham being bypassed, as it's a quick combination play with the Atleti wide players that pull the left back out of position and they're able to break down the right channel. And prior to that, the same could be said about Vinny Jr. and Tchouaméni. But luckily for Carreras, in both of these scenarios, Atleti were wasteful when they got themselves into good position. So as you can see, this was a definitive tactical disaster for Xabi Alonso, in which Diego Simeone consistently exploited Real's lack of cohesive pressure on the ball and the positioning of their fullbacks to create their best chances and hand the away side their first loss of the La Liga campaign.